This is about a larger systemic change about the kind of system we operate in.
I believe that this is the moment that we need democracy more than ever.
We need more people of all types of backgrounds to step up and offer their expertise to solve the challenges in each of our communities.
Let's do what we know to be the right thing and be true to that inner voice. I didn't ask to be treated differently, but I'm going to take it on because I have a job to do and nothing's going to get in my way of doing that.
Go get yourself a political home. You know, Vote or Lead would love to be that home. Black Voters Matter would love to be that home for you.
Thank you for your support. Thank you for leading and running as you are. And I have your back.
So what I want to do first is I want to talk a little bit about our agenda, and then I'm going to go in to do some housekeeping. As Erin mentioned, today it's the second of a series of meetings that we're having on Zoom called Your Kitchen Cabinet. I want to let you guys know that next week we have, at the same time, we're having another call. It's going to be on what voters are thinking and feeling and how we, as folks who worked on campaigns, should be messaging them. So please register and join us again next week. For the purpose of today, though, we want to just welcome everybody. We're going to hear a couple of comments and remarks from our speakers, who I'll introduce later on, and then we'll open the forum up for some Q&A. After that's done, we're actually going to break you guys up automatically into breakout rooms where you'll have you'll be assembled with a few of other participants, and you'll have a more intimate conversation about what's going on around getting out the vote and voting. And we've actually developed some resources to help you guys. And so we have some amazing trainers that are going to be leading a conversation in those breakout rooms about those resources. And then we'll reconvene and we'll call it a day. Because this is not only a holy weekend, but also because I know that all you have a lot of things on your mind, we want to be respectful of your time. And so I want to let folks know that we will end after an hour, but we will open up, we will keep up the Zoom channel open so that if folks want to continue to stay on and have a conversation, that can totally be possible. I do want to hope, I hope that everybody can stay muted so that we can have this conversation. But there will be a portion of the call where you all will be able to ask questions of the speakers. And when that happens, if you can go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a toolbox. If you click on the toolbox that says participant, it will come up and there will be an option for you to actually raise your hand. And during the Q&A session, if you have a question you want to ask, feel free to stay muted, but raise your hand. And Mark, who is our logistics guru, he will unmute you and you can ask your question. I do want to say that also in that same toolbox, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to type in any remarks or comments or feedback you have while the speakers are talking. We want you to be active on chat box. And then last but not least, I know that you all believe this already, but we want to be respectful and open-minded of the comments and the questions and remarks that are being said. So please don't yuck my yum, and let's all come together to learn. With that being said, I want to introduce our three amazing speakers today. Our first speaker is going to be Keesha Gaskins-Nathan. Keesha is currently the Director of Democratic Practices for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. She has over 20 years experience as a lobbyist, as an organizer, as a trial attorney. Keesha has actually served on served as the Executive Director of numerous organizations that focus on women and voting. And I'm so excited to be here. She is my go-to person when it comes to voting. We also have here a dear friend, State Representative JoCasta Zamarripa from Wisconsin. JoCasta currently represents the south side of Milwaukee in the Wisconsin State Assembly. And she was also the first Latina elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly. She's currently running for City Council in Milwaukee, and she's gonna share with us firsthand experience of what happened last Tuesday. And then we also have Amber McReynolds with us. Amber is a co-author of a book called When Women Vote. And she is currently the CEO of the National Vote at Home Institute and Coalition. It's an amazing organization that has been instructing and supporting a lot of secretaries of state right now around the peril in front of us. She was also formerly Director of Elections for Denver, Colorado, and she's a recognized national leader around mail-in vote. In addition to these three speakers, when we break out into the breakout room, we're also going to be supported by 4 amazing national certified trainers for Vote Run Lead. They're Jamu Green, Sheena Kadi, Dominique Jackson, and Danielle Sandaza. So I want to thank all of you all for joining us and lending your expertise and your wisdom to this call. So let's get started. And I want to just, I'm going to stop my screen so we can see. Let me just get out of here. Okay, so I want to go to Keesha now. And I just want to ask Keesha, you know, given everything that's happened, Keesha, what is the state of voting for this general election? What are some of the perils or concerns that you're seeing, and what advice would you give to anybody who's running right now?
Okay, good morning, everyone. As Paku was kind of saying, my name is Keesha Gaskins-Nathan. I'm really honored to be spending this time with you today. So in response to your question, Paku, I want to talk a little bit, I want to set the stage a little bit, what's going on large scale with the courts, how the states are responding and what the implications then are for folks on this call and for voters and how we think about this work while we're trying to stay healthy while supporting a healthy democracy. So as we think about the courts, the United States Supreme Court intervened most recently in Wisconsin, where, or more accurately, refused to intervene, right? Refusing to address problems with the absentee balloting process and mailing, thereby really saying, look, we're going to allow the states to set these rules. We are not going to intervene. And we saw a similar federal court in Ohio that refused to force election officials to change voter registration deadlines after they changed the election deadlines. And so I think this signals something very, very big that people need to understand, which is judicial intervention probably is not going to provide a lot of relief, even if we see a lot of what we perceive to be unfair activity, that at this point the courts are deferring to the states, and so that means the states are people are going to have to pay very close attention to what's going on in the states. And I think as of yesterday, 16 states have pushed back presidential primaries or switched to vote by mail with extended deadlines. And we're going to let Amber get into all the details between vote by mail and some of the other pieces related to that. But we did see a couple of new states sort of pop in. I think Wyoming is one that was different before, who's now gone entirely to vote by mail. And so that is changing a little bit about how we're engaging on that level. But we also have to be cautious not to include the process for vote by mail with an absentee voting process. And those things can be really, really different. The implications for how you mobilize voters, GOTV strategies, particularly for same-day registration states who have been deeply dependent upon knock and drag campaigns, have not focused heavily on vote registration. Absentee ballot and vote by mail are completely dependent on registration lists being accurate. So that's a really big change of attention for people in certain states. And all of this, you know, is deeply impacted by the political realities and national attention for the COVID-19 crisis response. So when Senator Sanders withdrew from the Democratic race, regardless of how we feel about it, it lessened an enormous amount of pressure from the national stage on paying attention to elections. Indeed, earned media outlets are not thinking about elections in the same kind of way, despite the fact that the ability to facilitate most of this relief is happening at the local level, regional level, and decisions made by Congress. Most of the people who are running for office here are implicating those races, obviously not the presidential. And so really trying to figure out what that means and how the spaces for paid media has already been crowded out. So there's already there's some real implications, I believe, for what's happening with the crisis, in addition to how mechanically the state rules are going to implicate. So in summary, the biggest implications, I think the Sanders flipped a quote unquote off switch. I think for a lot of people, a lot of media outlets that changed their relationship with the election. The switch and the pressure on absentee balloting means you have to really be aware of the multiple deadlines and changes, and also the burdens on voters, right? Finding an individual stamp for people who don't use mail very often, it's not that easy. And if you had to think right now, particularly for me, who's an urban resident, I don't know immediately where I would find a stamp. And there's a few places where I can buy a book of stamps, but that becomes $5.50. And if I'm watching my budget, that becomes a real problem. So there's all these sort of questions that I think are really implicated by what we're seeing at the national stage. We've got a lot of great organizations, voting rights groups at the national level, voter registration groups, and really doing a great job. But I think that we have to really acknowledge that the burden, as usual, is falling to local elections, local election officials, and local candidates to really find ways to be responsive in an environment that really the elections are not going to be taking up a whole lot of noise, at least in the short term.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Keesha. You remind us so much that, in the past, we used to think of GOTV as maybe 2 weeks before election day, but now we have to be much more comprehensive about it. And I also love what you were talking about, how we had to think about the equity issues, right, around both mail-in voting, but also absentee balloting and early voting. And those are all critical concerns that all campaigns should be focused on. So thank you. JoCasta, you had a first-person account of really the heartbreak in Wisconsin this past Tuesday. You're currently state representative, but you were also running for City Council Milwaukee, and Tuesday was essentially your general election. But you saw your GOTV plan change in just an hour, a couple of hours before election day. So can you tell us what happened, and what are the things that you had to adjust or accommodate given both Supreme Court ruling and then the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling at the last minute? And what you know now compared to what you knew then, would you have done anything differently on your campaign and in your Get Out the Vote plan?
Thank you, Paco. And thank you everyone for participating in this morning's phone call. I'm JoCasta Zamarripa, and like Paco just indicated, I just got done running for Alderwoman in the Tuesday, April 7th spring election. It was very unfortunate. In fact, we were going through a dry run yesterday, right, for this Zoom Vote Run Lead Zoom call, and I became choked up in talking about our election day just this past Tuesday, April 7th. It changed things immensely on the campaign trail as I was in the middle of my field strategy, knocking on doors, recruiting volunteers to join me to knock on doors. And I was looking at my calendar this morning, trying to figure out the exact date when my team pulled me out of the field and said we can no longer do doors. And it was specifically, I pinpointed the date, Thursday, March 12th. I came in to the campaign office, and one of my campaign teams said, we're pulling the field plan. We can't send you out there. And it was a fight. Half of the team was very upset and said, BS, we're not taking her out the doors. That's impossible. And half the team said, listen, we have to sit down here and figure this out. It's too dangerous, not just for JoCasta, but for her voters, for volunteers or JoCasta to go to their door. And so by the end of the night, I remember we convened again at something like 9 o'clock at night, and we had all kind of, the reality set in that we could not implement the field plan in the way that we wanted to with door canvases, and things really changed quickly. We did a lit drop briefly for about 24 hours. We did lit drop, we did not door knock. And I was trying to find a photo because I took a picture of my door card where I was writing, I am not knocking on your door today due to the coronavirus concern, be safe. We did that for 24 hours, but then we pulled that as well because that was just kind of seen as, too much of a risk. And from there we went to phones and lost a considerable number of volunteers, and yet we continued to campaign. Keesha already said it. We had to move to GOTV immediately, and we hadn't done that readily. Folks who were not registered voters got disenfranchised very quickly, and the court decisions kept changing. And so I know I'm just supposed to keep my initial remarks to 3 minutes, but I could talk to you guys all day about what it's like to campaign in a COVID pandemic, and I'm looking forward to telling candidates more about what we can do to still run and win while you're campaigning during a pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, JoCasta. And I definitely want to follow up with you on a question about how folks were feeling. But before we do that, I want to pivot to our final speaker, Amber. Amber, there are really technically only 5 states in this country that do mail-in vote at home or mail-in ballots. Everybody else, actually, all the other states may have a varying degree of absentee ballots. And so I'm wondering, with all your experience, can you share with us, some tricks, some tactics, some tools that are really effective in voting at home and then sending in your ballot that really allows voters to have a positive experience?
Sure. I will say I'm hoping that it's working okay, but it seems yeah. So many of a couple things. I mean, first and foremost, I was the that includes mailing a ballot to everyone proactive.
Amber, it's going in and out. Yeah, can you call in your the sound?
Same day.
So as Amber's coming back to us, one of the things I noticed that I think in the chat, I noticed that I might have made some confusion. Absentee ballot request forms are different than your absentee ballot or your vote by mail ballot. Those ballots can be sent with no postage, under postage. Every vote by mail state has some mechanism to get a ballot back without postage. And in every state, the US Postal Service will deliver a ballot, even if it's non-posted or under-posted. That is not true for the absentee ballot request form. And that's a different document where there's absentee balloting in the state. If it's not online requested, you really do have to pay attention to what is the process by which someone gets a hold of a ballot in your state and help facilitate the ability for people to obtain both the request form and the ballot in time for it to get back. Because as we mentioned, the Supreme Court has already said, if it's not back on time, they will invalidate those ballots under state law, and the federal government will not step in to force states to change their mind, change their rules, or count ballots that are late. So that I just wanted to name that distinction because I think I might have created some confusion between the absentee ballot request form and an actual ballot. And once a voter has a ballot, getting it back in is usually a postage-free process. Getting to that point is not.
Great. And Keesha, while we're waiting you all for Amber to get back on, JoCasta, I wanted to ask you, what was the feeling of voters on election day?
It was frustration and anger in many regards. I certainly fielded calls from my constituents who were not able to cast their vote for me and were very frustrated. For me, it was very disheartening. Many Spanish speakers, we have US citizens that are absolutely Spanish speaking dominant. And so they receive information. It takes them that much longer to receive information about polling location changes, that much longer. And so you can imagine, I represent a Latino majority district. I did have voters that didn't know that their location had changed, that literally went to their polling location. And I didn't get to say this in my opening remarks. Usually the city of Milwaukee has over 100 polling locations. This is the largest city in the great state of Wisconsin. On election day this past Tuesday, we had 5 polling sites for the entire city. My polling site for my district was well outside, a 10 to 12 minute drive if you were lucky enough to have your own car to the polling location outside of my district. Many folks didn't even know that their polling location had changed. There was anger, there was frustration, and there continues to be anger and frustration and sadness.
It just breaks my heart, honestly, that we live in this great country and it's just not right.
Can I ask a question, Paku? Is there anybody, JoCasta, who is looking at a recall for the Wisconsin elections right now? Because I think that's something that folks are really interested in, sort of in getting behind. What can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now, there's a lot of talk, about the injustice of the in-person voting this past Tuesday, April 7th. I certainly have been calling out the Speaker of the Assembly, Representative Robin Voss, who really was the lead voice in forcing in-person voting this past Tuesday. And so I believe that we're all kind of waiting with bated breath, because Monday, we don't have the results. I don't know if I won this past Tuesday, so we're waiting for the results to be released on Monday. And I think after that, everything will start to really move. But I'm hoping folks like the ACLU will come together. They're already, calling out just the injustice, the disenfranchisement of many underrepresented voters, seniors, people of color. And so I believe we'll start to see that start to come together as soon as Monday hits and those results come out.
Great. So we're going to try to get Amber back online because she has, I know, a wonderful thing to share with us. But in the meantime, let's open up this forum for folks who are in the audience or online. If you're interested in asking Keesha or JoCasta a question, please feel free to just raise your hand and Mark will unmute you. You can ask your question. Mark, do we have anybody in the queue?
So I'm seeing a couple questions that have kind of come up, and one of the things I think is sort of I'm very concerned about 2020 being like the year of the great disenfranchisement, right? That we're seeing the inability of the government to respond both, I will say this word and leave it right there, the census, but also with elections, but looking at the impact on our democracy is going to be significant. The changes to polling locations, the changes to the number of volunteers is sincerely problematic. It's in Wisconsin resulted in a massive close of polling locations, in addition to the fact many polling locations are nursing homes and schools, which they will not allow during this time. So even if the polling locations are open, they're really not likely to be in many of the same places. And JoCasta points out something else, that many times when you send these ballots back in, someone's still got to open them. There's a lot of machines that will open in some of these mails, but they're not designed to carry the burden of all of these states, of all these ballots coming in to a central location. That's not usually what happens. So the counting of the ballots is going to take longer. And I think one of the things that happens is also to prep people. It's going to take longer because the longer it takes, the more suspicious people become. And we don't want to undermine the validity of elections, but at the same time, we do have a real tension with how all these processes and changes are confusing. May exclude people, may make things difficult to understand, and then ultimately trying to get these ballots in the mail, postage or not, 10 days before the deadline is a real tough lift for folks who have seen GOTV look very, very different in years past.
Right. I could even imagine it possibly a bottleneck. We have Nikita Richards. Nikita, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Like my rollers. All right, so one of the biggest issues that we're seeing here in certain parts of Illinois is that there is, in some rural districts, there's this inability or either, carelessness about cleaning up the voter roll. And my concern is that, we're going to be heavily dependent on updated voter registration logs, voter rolls from our election officials in certain counties. And, I'm just wondering if, Keesha, if you have any suggestions for how different counties can, or certain grassroots organizations or Democratic County Chair Associations can put a little bit more pressure or checks and balances on those election officials to ensure that those voter registration or voter rolls are maintained in a way that will help us with this solution. Because I'm really, really concerned about that. Even when it comes to, tools like Vote Builder, right? It's reliant upon clean, maintenance voter logs. So, just wondering how do you have any suggestions for that?
Oh, actually, it looks like Amber's back, and that's actually a perfect question, because as a former election official and thinking about how important the voter rolls are to vote by mail, I think Andrew's probably, I'm sorry, not Andrew, Amber has a lot to offer on that. So let's let Amber do her thing, and she might even answer your question in that.
Sure. I'm so sorry, everyone. My internet was bad. So I logged out and logged back in, and then there was a max number of participants, so I couldn't get in. Well, it's great to be here and see you all. I didn't hear the first part of that question, but I think it related to voter rolls and making sure that addresses are correct. So one of the key things that is so important, and one of the things that we advocate for when thinking about expanding vote at home, or really any system that has a lot of absentee voting, is that address updating. And there's a lot of methods and ways to do that. One of the things that was really successful in Denver, actually before we went to the full system, we did an extensive outreach to inactive voters, because oftentimes inactive voters are the ones that don't interact as often. Maybe they don't vote as often. They vote in presidential races and not all the other elections. And so they tend to go a long time without interacting with the election officials. We did a mailer to them that was sent forwardable mail and encouraged them to update their addresses, and that produced a lot of people engaging and kind of re-upping their address. The other thing that's really important is regularly checking addresses. So using national change of address databases, those things are all built into Colorado's laws, as well as Oregon, Washington, California, and we are recommending that as a critical element of any expansion of voting at home, to be sure voters can get their ballot effectively. And the final piece I would say, which I was going to cover in my remarks, is ballot tracking tools. And in Denver, Colorado, we actually built the first ballot tracking application in the country back in 2009. And now there's a lot of different states and there's different platforms that offer this, but it's exactly like tracking a FedEx package or a UPS package, in that it uses the intelligent mail barcode on the envelope, and voters can opt in and get text and email notifications about the status of their ballot. And that's a really effective tool to give voters transparency about where their ballot is, and if there's any issues with their ballot, like it not being delivered to them because of an address issue, the election official can actually generate automatic messages to tell the voter, hey, there was an issue, you need to update your address so that we can get your ballot to you. And that tool in and of itself can also be a turnout tool. It can be a reminder, and it gives voters that extra confidence. So that's one of the other recommendations that we have with expanding vote at home, is to make sure states have those systems in place. And the great thing is it doesn't require legislation. It's just simply a technology that we can build in without requiring any legislative changes.
Before we go to some of the audience, Amber, I wanted to ask you too, in all your experience, what are some things that campaigns can do to make the voting process positive? So I heard from officials in Washington that they would have ballot parties, right? And obviously we can't do in-person ballot parties, but maybe folks could do virtual ballot parties. But what are other things like that can work? Especially because, a lot of sometimes people think that it's the day of the week as opposed to day of birth, and they fill it out incorrectly. But then when they put it in through the machine, or someone else looks at it that's at the polling site or at the office, they're like, oh, you did this wrong, you can fill it again. But we don't have those second eyes looking at the different forms. And so what are things that we can do to decrease that possibility?
Sure. Well, and maybe I'll just give a couple of kind of high level points here, which is what I was going to say during my remarks. But a couple things to note. So there's absentee voting, and then there's a situation like Colorado where we mail out a ballot to everyone. In the states that do that, we've sort of built up over time lots of mechanisms to make sure addresses are up to date, voter education tools. And what I would say is the best practices have been worked out in these states, including Colorado, California, Washington. And so there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And on our website at Vote at Home, we actually put up not only the research associated with this reform, but also tools for election officials, tools for others to engage, whether it be messaging or tactics, if you will, to make sure the process goes well. And what we've seen in Colorado, and I've also heard of this happening in other states, is exactly what you said. There's sort of a new way to create community around the mail-in ballot process. Normally, when you go to the polling place, traditionally some people say, oh, I like to see my neighbors and all of that. Well, the fact is a lot of people work a long ways away from their assigned government location on election day. So the great thing about mail voting is you can create a network beyond your sort of geographic community and make it much broader. And you can, I think Zoom is a great tool to use to, even give people go through the instructions, make sure that they understand the process that they're doing. There's a way to put videos out on that. And the great thing about mail ballots is every voter is getting the exact same instruction on how to vote their ballot. So they no longer have to rely on a poll worker to get it right at the polling place, or a machine to not malfunction. They get all of that sent to them at home. And so for a campaign and organizing perspective, it's actually much easier and more effective to be able to reach voters because they have that ballot on their person at home, and you can organize around it. Some of the other things I would just say, and we have this research on our website, but one of the studies we did actually found that voters go farther down the ballot. And so turnout actually increases quite substantially for state house races, local races, municipal races, when voters get their ballot at home, which I know I saw a lot of folks are running for different offices, down ballot races. And that is hugely important for you all as you're running this year in a presidential cycle. And the benefit, it shows the benefit of a vote by mail system, in that we see between 5 and 7 point increases in turnout for those down ballot races. And we have that study on our website, which I think is hugely valuable for all of you. And then just a couple of other things I wanted to highlight. First, Wisconsin is exactly what should not be done. Wisconsin, was put, I think the election officials and voters in particular were put in a terrible circumstance in that they went from 120,000 requests about 3 weeks ago to almost 1.4 million. And that process of making voters sign up is a two-step process, because you have to have the voters sign up, and then the election official has to process that request. Then the ballot has to go out. And so that creates a problem with timing, because ballots don't get out as fast as they would had Wisconsin just mailed a ballot to everyone, which is why we believe that's a much better process, because it eliminates this sort of two-step process. The other piece that I would just say is, in terms of absentee balloting as well, when you as a campaign, when you know your voters are going to get that ballot mailed to them at home, and you can see that on the data sets that your states and localities provide, you then can follow up in a much more effective way and make sure that they turn their ballot in. So the more, every day that goes by, more and more voters submit their ballots as election day gets closer. So the pool of people that you have to reach out to actually diminishes. And one of the things that we encouraged, and this actually works really well for voters, especially in a presidential cycle, is when you tell voters, once you vote and once you turn your ballot in, the mailers and the calls are going to stop. You're no longer going to get all of the outreach that you normally do. It actually encouraged a lot of voters to say, oh, great, I'll check myself off the list and turn my ballot in. So it just gives you all of that exponential improvements in terms of how you're campaigning, and it makes it much easier for you to target those voters that are remaining to vote instead of the entire file each time.
Thank you, Amber.